Today with Ms. Landsman. Ms. Landsman, the floor is yours. You have 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Mr. Minister, thanks for accepting the invitation. We've heard a lot of testimony throughout the day and we've seen and heard firsthand stories of canceled Christmas, endless delays, sleeping on airport floors, being shuffled from hotel lobby to hotel lobby in a foreign country. Your government has been in power for 7 years, and you have been Minister of Transport since the beginning of 2021. You oversaw the chaos this summer leading to Canadian airports being ranked the worst in the world, both #1 and #2 spots. And on November 17th, you blamed airport staff shortages as the reason for the chaos during the summer and claimed to have solved the problem. You had a summit, but as we heard from witnesses today, provided no policy directives as per the airline's testimony. And worse, passenger protections put in place by the government have failed to actually protect passengers, consumers, and anyone in this country who was stuck elsewhere or stuck on a tarmac for well over 12 hours in some cases. And a Canadian that flies British Airways to the UK is better protected than one who flies WestJet to the UK. And that remains a fact under these passenger protections. So, Minister, you yourself are responsible and have the tools to fix it. The question is why you waited so long, why you waited from the first time you heard about Sunwing, presumably when the rest of the country did on December 19th, why you waited till January 5th, and why you haven't spoken to the airports, as we heard, while Canadians were stranded again on tarmacs for 12 hours, in some cases in Vancouver. So I have a few questions. The Canada Transportation Acts permits Cabinet, on your recommendation, orders to stabilize the national transportation system in an event of extraordinary disruption. Now, we all agree that the Sunwing situation was an extraordinary disruption, and you didn't recommend to Cabinet to make an order under Section 47 in connection with Sunwing. So I ask, why not, and what was more important? What had you preoccupied?
And I want to welcome back Ms. Landsman to this committee. There were so many in her remarks that deserve to be unpacked, and I understand the political interest in conflating what happened last summer with what happened this Christmas, which I think Canadians understand that they are two separate situations. Having said that, our government and I personally have been very proactive since the summer. She talked about the summit that I held, which was not the only thing that was done from the summer till now. She talked about communications with Sunwing. I can assure her and all of my colleagues that my office, first of all, I have been briefed regularly and daily, in fact, sometimes hourly, on what's happening. My officials, my office has been in touch with Sunwing daily, sometimes more than once a day, to ensure that we get updated, to ensure that we remind Sunwing of their obligations towards their customers and to Canadians. And Mr. Chair, we've been working, when I was here just December 5th, just over a month ago, committee members were asking me what lessons have we learned from the summer, and I was glad to share about our work plan. And I did talk about the plan to improve our passenger bill of rights. I talked about the plan to modernize security screening. I talked about our plan to improve the authorities that airports have, and I talked about improving the authorities and the tools that the Canadian Transportation Agency needs. This is ongoing work. This is extremely serious. We've been proactive, and I wish when the Conservatives were in power had implemented a passenger bill of rights, because today we would have been in a much better position, improving and enhancing the rules. We are where we are. As I said in my opening remarks, and our government accept our responsibility, and we are working to ensure that lessons learned will be benefited from, our passengers' rights are protected, but it's important to remind Canadians that we do have rights for passengers. In fact, Sunwing violated those rights. So the issue is not only that we didn't have rules. The issue is that some private operators also did not uphold their obligation.
Minister, I appreciate the answer, and I think we should have equal time to ask and answer. Since you didn't use the section that would allow for orders to stabilize the network. There's another section in the Act, it's number 49, that gives you the power to direct the Canadian Transport Agency, that's the agency that we'll hear from, that's 33,000 claims backlog, that is responsible for some of these passenger protections to which passengers weren't protected in this country, to conduct an inquiry into any matter related to the federal network. So a few more questions. Did you direct the CTA to conduct an inquiry into Sunwing, the flight delays, the cancellations, the tarmac delays, and if not, why not?
Mr. Chair, and to Ms. Landsman, the way we set up in our system, the CTA is an arm's length quasi-judicial body that is delegated or empowered to uphold and enforce the rules. The reason why we set it up that way is to avoid the appearance of political interference in investigation, in fining, in holding parties responsible accountable. That idea has served Canadians well to ensure that there is independence and there is non-political interference. Having said all of that, I have been working with the chair of the CTA, with the Canadian Transportation Agency, since my appointment as a minister, but particularly since the summer. I made it clear that I expect the rules to be upheld, that I expect that the CTA identifies ways to improve the efficiency of managing their backlog. And I also am committed to working with the CTA to provide them with the resources that they need and to help improve the efficiency of processing their complaints.
Thank you very much, Minister, and thank you very much, Ms.
Gentlemen, thank you too. The last time you came before this committee, we were talking about what happened over the summer, which has nothing to do with the storms we had in December. That much we agree upon. You are once again before this committee. At your level of intervention, what explains the fact that the mess continues? These are two different incidents, but there is still a mess. So is there anything that should be reinforced in the regulation to protect air passengers, to give it more teeth? Is that one of the potential solutions?
Merci, Madame.
Thank you, Madam Mignola, for the question.
Let me just repeat. First of all, thank you for repeating the fact that they were two different situations. And Canadians are used to the fact we live in Canada, that we occasionally have extreme weather events that disrupt their travel plans. And Canadians are patient when it comes to these things. What is unacceptable to them and to me is when they're kept in the dark about what alternative plans are they provided or left stranded for days on end without any information. That was unacceptable. And it was today acknowledged by Sunwing that they made a mistake. Having said that, I will answer your questions. Yes, there are opportunities to strengthen the passenger Bill of Rights. I said this in my committee appearance on December 5th, and I will repeat it again, and I will assure you that I am and the department is currently working on these rules.
Dans les suggestions.
Among the suggestions when it comes to sanctions or improvements to the regulation, we're talking about maximal sanctions for the sanctions that exist at the moment go from $5,000 to $25,000. In the U.S., it's a maximum of $400,000. Are you considering Canadian sanctions to go up to really dissuade the companies to even envisage not to conform with the regulation, or do you think the amounts that we have are dissuasive enough?
Thank you for the question. Yes, we are looking at the issue of fines. If there's an opportunity to increase the fines or to enhance the rules, I welcome this committee's suggestion. And let me assure you that if you compare our overall regime to the U.S. regime, any independent observer will tell you that the Canadian system is stronger. That doesn't mean that we can't learn from the U.S. and the European model. And we're looking at different aspects, and I welcome the committee's suggestions on how else we can make them stronger.
Merci.
Thank you. Security issues cannot be brought up to refuse compensation in Europe, even if it's something that's outside the control of the airlines. They should still provide some kind of compensation. Once again, are you considering to modify the regulation to better protect air passengers, and that the regulation gets closer to what's in place currently in Europe?
We are looking at, as I said, almost every aspect of the regulation to how we can further enhance it and strengthen it. And let me just be very clear, by the way. You're right, there are occasions, I've heard of occasions where the airlines is using the justification of safety to cancel flight, to avoid compensating passengers. And there has been a judgment by the Canadian Transportation Agency recently, just this, I think, summer or fall, that airlines cannot use labor shortage as a justification for safety, and therefore that airlines are responsible for those cancellations, even though they may have used the justification of safety.
Merci.
Thank you. So it is a reality then that there is some weakness that can be strengthened. So once again, focusing on potential solutions, you have noticed that I'm trying to concentrate on potential solutions. There are passengers' rights advocacy groups who have contacted us, and they're saying, look, this does not make any sense because the victims of the situation, the passengers, they are held responsible for proving their case before the airline companies to get compensation. So in your studies, in your efforts, are you considering to make changes so that the burden of proof is not on the shoulders of the passengers, but on the airlines?
Again, I want to thank you for focusing on constructive solutions, and my answer, in fact, I mentioned it in my opening remarks. We are looking at ensuring that more of the burden is on the airline, not on the passenger. The truth of the matter is the burden has always been on the airline. However, it's clear that there's further room to improve and clarify these rules. So that is precisely what we're looking at.
Merci beaucoup, Madame Vignola.
Thank you very much, Madam Vignola.
We have Mr. Bachrach. Mr. Bachrach, the floor is yours. You have 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Minister, for accepting our invitation to be here today. We're all here because Canadians are frustrated. They're angry, they're dismayed, and they feel betrayed. Both in the travel period of last summer and in the most recent holiday travel period, we saw the big airlines walk all over any semblance of passenger rights in this country. We now have a backlog of 33,000 complaints before the CTA, and that's just the tip of the iceberg because we know that only a small fraction of passengers manage to jump through all the hoops that you've created for them and get to the complaint process. Now, the big airlines are acting this way because they can get away with it, because you let them. And my first question for you is, why have you not stood up to the airlines on behalf of air passengers?
Mr. Chair, Mr. Bachrach, I appreciate your question, and I am here also equally because I know Canadians are frustrated, and I am frustrated, and I believe that this committee here is able to provide information and answers for Canadians and keep the pressure on the sector, including on government, to make sure that we do everything we can to protect passengers' rights. Let's be clear. The responsibility is of the airlines to uphold passengers' rights. Airlines, when they violate the rules, they need to be held accountable for that. They need to compensate their passengers. They need to compensate their customers for what they paid them to do. And we need to avoid, in fact, going to the CTA for passengers to receive the compensation they deserve. We set up a framework that never existed in Canada's history before 2019 because we saw the vacuum that existed. 2019 rules came into in force before the pandemic. The pandemic exposed certain weaknesses. we strengthened them, and now we are looking at additional ways to strengthen the rules. So let's be clear. The airlines should or must continue to uphold passengers' rights, and when they violate them, they need to compensate their customers.
Well, Minister, I would argue that it's also the government's responsibility to uphold passenger rights. And unfortunately, the air passenger protection regime that you've created has massive loopholes in it. You could fly a 747 through these things, and we see airlines clearly exploiting those loopholes in order to avoid paying passengers the compensation that they're due. So it is positive to hear that you're once again going to go into the protection regulations and make some changes. My question is whether you'll commit to this committee that when those changes are done, Canada's legislation and regulations will be up to the standards set by the European Union and considered the gold standard for air passenger protection around the world.
Mr. Chair and Mr. Bacharach, I know this committee held hearings in November on the Passenger Bill of Rights. And now you know you've had expert witnesses tell you that the regime is quite strong. I know you've had experts tell you that it was stronger, much stronger than the US regime. I know there are differences between our system and the European system, and we're looking, and we have been looking, and we'll continue to look at other jurisdictions around the world. So I commit to you that we are learning from the lessons of the last year, and that we are committed to clarifying, strengthening, and simplifying rules. So that is my commitment to you and to Canadians. But let there be no confusion. It is our government who understood that there is a vacuum there, that we brought in the Bill of Rights, that we studied and implemented rights that are way stronger than exist in our neighbors to the south. And any responsible government would learn and look for more opportunities to strengthen these rules, and that's precisely what we're doing.
You said earlier that you haven't directed the CTA because of its arm's length quasi-judicial nature, and yet the Canada Transportation Act specifically sets out in Section 43 the power for you to provide policy direction to the CTA. Why have you never used that tool despite all the challenges that we've seen in this country?
Actually, that's not true, Mr. Bacharach. I have directed the CTA on several policy items. The question is directing them on an investigation. But on a policy perspective, I'll tell you, I'll have in my mind the recent example. I sent a directive to the CTA about accessibility, about making sure that airlines and the sector has strong rules to accommodate their customers who have accessibility issues. So I have utilized that tool on bilingualism. We will continue to use, but the question was on specific investigation, which is different than policy.
It wasn't on a specific investigation. It was on the topic of air passenger rights. For instance, the fact that the CTA has utterly failed to penalize the airlines at monetary amounts that are meaningful. The only fines we've seen total a little over $100,000. In the United States, the government has fined the big airlines over $7 million since the beginning of the pandemic. Why does this government treat the airlines with kid gloves, and why haven't you provided direction to the CTA to strengthen enforcement so that the airlines stop trampling on air passenger rights?
Mr. Bacharach, I appreciate your passion on this, and I share it. You had airlines today and on previous occasions tell you how this government is not treating them with kids' gloves. We are not treating airlines with kids' gloves. In fact, we're looking to, as I said, further strengthen the rules to ensure that passengers are protected. So let's be very clear. We have provided the CTA with the regulatory framework to uphold the law, to fine airlines who have been found in violation. And are there opportunities to strengthen these rules? I'm saying yes, and we're working on them.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bacharach, and thank you, Minister. Next, we have Mr. Strahl. Mr. Strahl, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And it's certainly interesting to see Liberal members here at the committee doing victory laps after we've just experienced such a catastrophic travel season. And Minister, far from the opposition or the media conflating the summer and winter travel seasons. It was yourself. It was you when you brought together industry players in November who declared that you were confident that Canadians could have confidence that there would not be the same issues plaguing the system that we saw in the summer, that the travel chaos had been managed because you held a summit. We've learned from both the airports and the airlines this morning that in fact you gave no policy direction at that summit. It appears to have been simply a public relations exercise so that you could say that you were doing something. You indicated that the government should do everything in their power to protect passengers, but we learned today, we asked the question, we asked Vancouver International Airport, the Vancouver Airport Authority, did the minister call you? Has the minister called you since the middle of December? No. We asked the Montreal Airport Authority, did the minister call you since the middle of December? The answer was no. We asked the Toronto Airport Authority, did the minister call you since the middle of December? The answer was no. And most shockingly, the airlines also indicated that, especially Sunwing, said that they had not heard from you directly until January the 5th, which was more than 2 weeks after the catastrophic failure of that airline and people sleeping in hotel lobbies in a foreign country. So you waited until the passengers had been returned to Canada. You waited until the crisis had passed before you even did the basic thing to pick up the phone and contact the entities that had failed Canadians. So accountability starts at the top. And I would argue that you are passing the buck. You have not engaged with the industry directly. You might have left it to your officials. But between Christmas and New Year's, we needed to see action from you. And we didn't see it. We saw in the United States, we saw the U.S. Transportation Secretary, Pete Buttigieg, he picked up the phone. He had Southwest Airlines hauled onto the carpet within 24 hours of their failure. And you were nowhere for over 2 weeks. So given that, why did it take you until January the 5th to do your job, to talk to Sunwing Airlines, to demand answers for Canadian travelers?
Mr. Chair and Mr. Strahl, first of all, thank you for highlighting the work that was done during the summer by continuously bringing the airlines and other players in the sector to ensure that we're on the same page and that they understood the government's expectations of them. And in fact, at that summit that was held in November, it was made very clear to participants that we want to do everything in our power to avoid what we saw in the summer. And to a large degree, much of that had been avoided. Again, I won't deny that the extreme weather events have caused significant disruptions, and combined with the rush of the Christmas holiday and bad decisions by operators ended up causing an unfortunate and frustrating delay and frustration by many passengers. Second, I know you're not deliberately trying to mislead Canadians, because I know that the airlines and the airports did clearly say to you that my office had been in regular contact with airports and airlines on a daily basis. I was daily involved and briefed. By the way, the airlines or the airports were not confused about my instructions or my feeling about what was happening, about my expectations. It is not uncommon that it's typically, especially on a daily basis, it's done through my office or done through Transport Canada.
What else were you doing, Minister? What else were you doing?
I've been extremely involved and engaged on a regular basis. Airlines heard from us, maybe not even daily, maybe multiple times a day. So I can assure you. And the U.S., by the way, is set up differently than Canada. That the Department of Transportation in the U.S. is the one that is responsible for enforcing their protections, while in Canada, we set up the Canadian Transportation Agency to be at an arm's length. So there's why there's a difference there. Having said that, I was personally involved on a daily basis, in fact, on an hourly basis, on what was happening, and my instructions, my directions were clearly communicated regularly to airlines and airports.
Thank you very much, Minister, and thank you very much, Mr. Strahl. Prochainement,